Welcome to the next episode of the Existential Files. Hello, Louis.
Hello, Matthew.
And hello, Yannick. We're going to pick up the conversation from last time. Yannick, you there?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm here.
Fab. So listeners will be able to pick up more information about Yannick from the previous episode. But I want to kind of pick up the conversation kind of almost as we left it at the end of that one. Particularly with this idea of, we're faced with choices, faced with the choice and choices all the time. So you get to choose this kind of thing. And I think, Louis, you were saying something along the lines of, well, you are the freest thing within the universe. A black hole cannot choose to be anything other than a black hole, for example. So given in other conversations, we've talked about at what point then does this sense of choice come about? Is that because we are, to use the word, conscious beings, that we have that ability to make a choice? I mean, what makes that special about? Is that being human? Is it being an animal?
Well,
is it having any kind of form of life? Is that enough for us to be able to choose things?
I'll ask the question. I mean, how many creatures on the planet can read a Dostoevsky novel and understand it, right? Those are the creatures that I consider to be existentially free. That good enough for you?
Okay,
no.
so that's for me.
I disagree. I think any human being, regardless of whether they are able to comprehend Dostoevsky, are inherently free.
I think, Yannick, I was being slightly flippant.
I know.
Yeah. Obviously,
you're not going to get away with it here.
But in which case, Louis, are you saying any human, Louis, then, as opposed to animals? So it's something about human consciousness?
No, let me say any human above the age of about 3, and any human that isn't suffering any kind of, severe retardation. If we're going to be specific about this, I mean, generally speaking, I find most human beings are existential beings.
I think as soon as you're alive and in the world with other people, you are existentially free and you have to make decisions. I don't think it's there's a limit in terms of age or mental retardation.
Well, I mean, I think
let me just clarify first of all. We're talking humans as opposed to non-humans. So non-humans not existentially free.
Well, I don't think that animals. I don't think Coco the gorilla is an existential being. Personally, that's my personal opinion.
And therefore, go on.
That's interesting because where is that line? When do you stop being human? Given that apes and humans are so close. There was the whole gender discussion as a result of International Women's Day, and then what Trump decided recently in terms of transgender, and it's not a black and white thing. Where does male stop and female begin? And I think. It might be difficult. I never thought about it that way, so thanks for that. But I think it's similarly difficult to say when does being human and existentially free stop, and when does being an animal begin.
I mean, it's funny. I was discussing this with my partner not that long ago about Down syndrome and suicide, and apparently the high-functioning Down syndrome people are more likely to commit suicide because they recognize that they're different from other human beings, and therefore that makes them, that feeling different makes them depressed.
Yeah, it's the same with high-functioning individuals. Everybody who's extremely different to the people around them is at a higher risk of suicide, just because we're social animals. We need to relate.
But I mean, I think my point there is that for me is some evidence of an existential awareness as well.
Mm-hmm.
Which perhaps maybe the lower functioning people don't have. As far as gender comes, I mean, for me, gender is something that, and anybody who reads my blog posts recently will see that. I mean, I consider that existentially free creatures are almost independent of biology. So I would expect to see. If you consider yourself male or female or whatever you want to consider yourself, I have absolutely no problem with that whatsoever. And I would expect existentially free beings to feel, for example, we were talking to Oren Harmon on Monday, and he was saying, your biology can only take you part of the way. And after that, human beings as existentially free beings can say, well, my biology is whispering in my ear and saying to me, Louis, you're a boy, but fuck it, I'm fucking free. And if I don't want to be a fucking boy, fuck biology. So I mean, that's my take.
So you're saying that you can only be existentially free if you're conscious of what that means?
I think you have to understand what being existentially free is to be existentially free, or have the capacity to be existentially free. I mean, if you know, I don't consider a 3-year-old baby or a 2-year-old baby to be existentially free, but they certainly have the capacity to be. I mean, they have the capacity to be. It just takes time for them to become aware of that capacity.
Yeah, I get your point. However, I still disagree. I still think that no matter what age you are, at some point you're going to be faced with some of these dilemmas and some of these givens, and you're going to realize that, you know, as soon as people stop telling you that grandma or the goldfish went on vacation, and you realize that there is a concept such as death, and that some people just go and they don't come back, and that's why that is something normal or natural, or something that just keeps happening. At that point, you know, you know that when you realize your choices matter, your choices do something, and when you decide something different things happen. I think at that moment, without being able to conceptualize it, I think you experience that you're existentially free.
Well, I mean, I would draw the line around the beginning of language. So, I mean, again, a child younger than, say, I mean, you know, a 1-year-old isn't necessarily aware of very much at all. But again, I think we're getting bogged down in things. I'm happy to say.
So I started, you know, I started the conversation on that one, and I think it's good to have had that debate and say, look, we're not just even dealing with this lightly. I wanted to sort of clarify this idea that, well, if to be existentially free, or at least to be human, even if we want to be broad and say, okay, we can debate if there's a certain development within being a human, do you need certain capacity? But still, being human is something about having, you know, human consciousness, and we can debate whether or not it extends to animals and so on. But is it that allows us to decide, make decisions or make choices that, for example, a tree cannot do? A tree is a tree is a tree. Whereas we as humans can choose to be a certain type of human. We can choose to do this with our experience or existence on life. We can choose something else, and we have choices all the time. Is it something about the essential of being human?
I mean, look, we'll get Yannick, because it's not the Louis and Matt show. We got a guest on, but all I'm going to say is that, you know, our ancestors, our biological ancestors, you know, were human beings, but I don't believe they were the same creatures as you and I, and it took us a long time to pull ourselves out of, you know, the kind of morass of animal being to become human beings. And you and I have discussed this in previous podcasts about, you know, cave paintings and the beginning of language and the beginning of writing. But I do not believe that genetic biology can be the drawing point to say, okay, these beings are existential beings, even if they have the capacity to be existential beings. I don't think historical prehistory archaeological evidence supports that. But again, that's my opinion.
Yeah, I think one of the main things that distinguishes us humans from animals, if you want to categorize it in that way, is that human beings have the ability to look into the future and envision the future. It's not just about language; it's about, you know, being able to really imagine something and then working towards it and making it happen. And I think that is quite amazing ability that we have, and that gives us so much choice and so much drive. That this really signifies us as a species.
So just then to clarify that, and maybe it leads us to a conversation or a question I want to ask directly at Yannick. So, and by existential being, we can mean by any being that's able to reflect on one's own existence. Is that one way of at least clarifying that? Okay. So Yannick, I wanted to kind of bring it back to some of the kind of applied questions would be, because to some extent, I think, you know, Louis and I could be accused of, in this podcast, being up one's own backside a little bit. We can sit and debate it and discuss it and ponder it and question and challenge and so on, and we get a lot out of that. So whether or not other people do, it's up to them. In your work, then, you're sort of taking at least some of these ideas, these questions regarding existentialism and what it means to be existential, and bringing it to a form of coaching, a form of psychotherapy, a context where you start from that basis to say, well, we can actually then use those ideas to help people who would like to have some kind of coaching support or whatever. I guess maybe it is to improve one's well-being, to explore one's place on this planet, and how one builds a life that they feel has some worth, some value, some enjoyment, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the goals that I've always had since I first came into contact with Heidegger and Buber and Sartre and Nietzsche and Kierkegaard. By the way, I learned from a Danish person that it's pronounced Kierkegaard. But like as soon as I got in touch with those books, I realized this needs translation into something that people can understand and relate to nowadays. Because the language can be so convoluted, and at times it's convoluted for a reason. So we refuse the dogma of what is attached to a certain term or a certain word, and we really think about it. But what I realized is this stuff is relevant to everybody that's alive in the world with other people. You know, I started every conversation I heard, or every piece of art, every story, every good movie that I've seen. There were usually at least one, most of the time, they're all four existential givens, like the one that we can actually agree on, actually in there all the time. And they are below the surface or right in your face, punching you. You know, they're there and they matter for everybody who's alive in the world with other people, because out of that come all of these dilemmas and questions and paradoxes and impossible choices, all this anxiety and all this living in denial and suppressing feelings, and then ending up in psychotherapy because we suppressed shit for too long. I realized that this stuff matters, and it's really a good way of understanding yourself and the struggles that are going on in your life better. And if we understand it more, we could actually start to embrace it and value it as the stuff that makes life worth living. So I always had an interest in translating existential philosophy and apply it for people and offer it as a tool so they can understand themselves better and make sense of their world and use the liberating power of it and make courageous choices to actually live life rather than avoiding it. So I try to take it, put it in a positive frame, and then apply it in the coaching room with clients.
And if I can say, Yannick, that I mean, I think that's a very laudable, ambition, and I mean, for me, I think helping fellow human beings, in this what I consider to be quite a hard job of living, and if you can just help them in any way possible, I mean, you are, if not doing good or if not being altruistic, then I think it is something that I don't want to use the word good, because I don't really, I'm not a massive fan of good and bad, but I think it's, I mean, I envisage it as being, throwing a lifeline to somebody who's drowning. It's the kind of barest minimum that we as human beings can do for one another.
I see it slightly different, because there's plenty of people who throw lifelines to people who are drowning, and these are the psychotherapists and counselors who help people once they actually start drowning. I throw lifelines to people who are still surfing.
And I mean, I guess, aren't we all drowning in a way? I mean, I guess this is whether we're wearing glasses where the people are above the water or where they've already fallen in. I mean, but yeah, I get what you're saying,
But let's stay with that, because if somebody is swimming and they don't turn around and they don't see the 40-foot wave coming, and I throw them a lifeline and they're like, what am I supposed to do with that? I'm not drowning, I'm fine. And some of the people, the ones that I work with, the ones I think are maybe a bit cleverer than others, they're going to build some defense mechanisms, because they realize there will be waves and I might not be able to see them, and I'm definitely going to be feeling like I'm drowning. I mean, I get your point in terms of, yes, we're all kind of drowning anyway, all the time. But I don't see it like that. I think we can swim to a certain extent, and then every now and then we get into situations where we feel like we're drowning. So I think it's good to develop what I call existential resilience, to be able to grapple with those big questions and make peace to an extent that we can with those givens, and try to see the value in them, so that then when the waves come and we feel like we're drowning, we can actually say, okay, well, this was inevitable. We're always going to be, wiped out every now and then. And now it's going to be struggling, you know. And if we stay with the example of surfing, you know, you're gonna have to paddle out through some heavy waves, you know, and there are some techniques that make it a bit easier. But if you want to surf, you're definitely going to get wiped out, you know, and you're definitely going to struggle for your life every now and then. And if you want to stay safe and, you know, take all the little tiny waves at a safe spot, then you only can have so much fun with life. You only can engage so much. If you want to go with the big waves, you know, that you're going to take a lot more risk and you're going to have a lot more fun. You're going to have a lot more out of life, you know. So again, it's a choice. Do you want to stay in calm waters or you're going to paddle out in the ocean?
Well, you're talking to someone who did, I was the only boy in the class who did widths and everyone else did lengths. So you're talking to the wrong person here, because I can't swim and I can't surf and I hate deep water. But I do
think it's a good analogy. Well, it's a good analogy. It's, first of all, interesting then that Lou would very much say that in the shallow water, in that respect. But to the original example you did use there, Yannick, was this idea of, you know, some people are still surfing. Then for a while, the analogy moved back to saying, oh, either drowning or we are treading water, swimming. And it's the recognition that actually, and some people, you know, it is surfing. It's not only just saying there's a big wave coming, how can I survive that wave so it doesn't kill me and push me under? There are people who find ways of actually being able to surf that wave in such a way. So that is actually the most enjoyable elements of it. It's using those parts of experience to bring a sense of, it's not even just well-being, but a level of experience in terms of one's own everyday life or ongoing life that is that exceptional level. And that's often it's those elements where positive psychology has been trying to explore. This idea of, I mean, one phrase we often use in some of our literature is optimal human functioning, being at your best. And that could be helpful to deal with when you're dealing with the crap that the world and life just throw at you, but also how you can do things to actually achieve the things you would love to achieve, even if in the grand scheme of things it's all pointless and amounts to nothing because we're all dead in the end. There's still a sense of you're giving it your best shot. You're having the experience and having something which, even if it feels though it has meaning, whether it has meaning or not, it's those kinds of elements where positive psychology and maybe the kind of coaching you're talking about is really trying to help people towards.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, surfing is pointless, completely pointless. You know, you're paddling out and you're coming back to the shore and then you're exactly where you were a couple of hours before. And all you have is an experience, you know. So in a sense, it's pointless, and it's not pointless at all. Positive psychology can teach you to surf better, can teach you to understand the waves better, perhaps, or like build the skills so you have better balance. You know, it can envision you in a better wave so you can find a better spot. But without the existential bit, which for me is anticipation of getting wiped out, to be able to face the fear of paddling into a massive wave and actually being fueled from it, you know, despite being your whole body screaming, you really should get the fuck out of here. You know, keep paddling and, you know, overcome these fears and embrace them, actually, you know, to have an understanding of what the wave is actually about, and that you cannot run, you can run away from it. You can stay on the beach if you want to. You're just going to watch everybody else surf, and that will feel pretty depressing at some point. Or you stand at the beach and you just like don't look at all. You just stare at your feet until you die. You know, that's also a choice. And you know, some people do that. They just hide away. They literally bury their head in the sand, to continue the analogy. So I do think that we need both to live a really rich life.
And can we assume, Yannick, you are a surfer?
I am not really.
Well, I'm an actual surfer as opposed to a kind of metaphorical surfer.
I surf snow and asphalt mainly. I have never lived near an ocean, so but I have been surfing, and I really like the analogy. It's the same with skating, downhill skating. It's the same with snowboarding or skiing. You know, it's the same with a lot of the sports that are the kind of spiritual kind of sports. You know, they all have these analogies, and they can all draw these little metaphors, life metaphors from it. That's why people get immersed in them so much, because they're a metaphor of life.
And there is something about not only those kinds of experiences, again, where you're talking about snow sports, water sports, where it's kind of people are having to really exert themselves and challenge and maybe take risks and so on. Mm-hmm. But even in other endeavors and pursuits, and again, it's a kind of topic or experience which has become a central thing to look at within positive psychology, which is this idea of this flow experience. When people describe they are doing things, it doesn't have to be those kinds of sports, but artistic pursuits, playing music, anything that's creative or in some way challenging, where people do have those experiences, which it's often those times when they describe as being, I felt most alive, or I felt completely lost in the moment. And it's almost like a quality of consciousness or conscious experience, where it's that element of my kind of living experience. And I'd love to have more of my life has that feel to it, because you are challenging, pushing, exploring, and perhaps living life to the full. And you can do that even if you are in the water, on the slopes, or just in your everyday life. And that's been one of the things that positive psychology has been trying to get its head around for a number of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really like the concept of flow. That was one of the first positive psychology concepts that really grabbed me. I mean, it's not a new concept, it's engagement with life, but like the way we've looked at it and made sense of it. And it really captured my attention because I've been experiencing it so much. And at these moments of flow, for example, I've been DJing for what 17 years now. And in the beginning, you had to come and grab my arm and shake me for me to actually realize that you tried to talk to me, because I was so immersed in what I was doing. Same with skiing and snowboarding. When I learned to skate, when I learned a lot of other stuff, and now in work quite often as well. So I learned to create the conditions to get into more flow. And I found it really interesting. Jason Silver once called flow the only cure for existential anxiety, because it's one of the few times when we're so engaged in what we're doing that we don't have any attention span left to feel anything that isn't completely relevant to what we're doing right now. This is the bliss in it. We're completely immersed in what we're doing. We lose the sense of self. We lose all of our worries. We don't have time to think or to worry or feel anything bad or contemplate the pointlessness of life, because we're so busy in a good sense, that we're just in that moment completely. And I think you can get to that kind of state as well through conversations and even through meditation. If we're trying to be mindful of as many senses as possible at the same time, we don't have the attention span to completely to contemplate existential questions. So that anxiety just isn't there as long as we are in flow. It's only temporary, but it's blissful.
I mean, I don't like to be. I mean, I'm wary of the time, but I don't like to be the naysayer. But I am always the naysayer, and it sounds to me like you're all a bit adrenaline junkies, addicted to endogenous opiates. And why not just go and take some smack and enjoy your heroin high? Because at the end of the day, a high by any other name is still as sweet.
Yeah, well, the high isn't there while you're doing it. The high comes afterwards, depending on what you've been through. But it's not necessarily like a dopamine high that you get from doing an extreme sport. If you're engaged in a conversation, you come out of that conversation and you might feel good, and it felt kind of meaningful because you were interested and you were engaged. But you don't necessarily have that same withdrawal symptom afterwards that you get from drugs or dopamine overdoses. So that's why smack and any sorts of other drugs, they're the easy way to get a lot of chemical activity in your brain going. It's the easy way to get in, but then the work comes afterwards when you're dealing with a hangover. When you do extreme sports, you have to work to get there, and then you get benefit without that much of the hangover. But even surfers, big wave surfers, they get massive hangovers. They get really depressed when there's no waves. So yes, you're right, I think.
And I was wondering, before Louis kind of suggested before, that again, maybe putting words into Louis' mouth, knew he would come back with something like that, saying, yeah, all very interesting, and it maybe tells us something about some element of the dynamics of everyday experience and how people can engage in certain activities to give themselves a sense of flow and not being too concerned with those existential issues. Yet effectively what you're doing with that period of time is blotting out really the backdrop. You're just basically fooling yourself and deluding yourself that things are okay when in fact they're not. So Louis, do you think that's a fair summary of what you might think about that?
But why then not? Because if it feels good at the moment, and let's say, okay, you've been surfing and it felt really like it doesn't feel anything because it is, and then you come from that session and it feels really good, and then you engage yourself in something else. Yes, you could argue that you're just denying that life is pointless, but if there's a point to everything that you do during every day of your life, then I can't tell that person that their life is meaningless when they say, well, it feels meaningful to me.
I think one of my, and this is just, responding to what people are saying. I mean, I think my thoughts come to, why, as long as we're not shitting on people who do want to just sit there and be, do you know what I mean? I mean, I subscribe again to this right to be lazy. If you don't want to go surfing, if you just want to sit there, if you want to be just a flower, a tree, no one says, hey tree, why are you not fucking surfing? Get out there, you're wasting your life, And the thing is that as long as it's not a clash of philosophies about life, and I think sometimes politics, and in Britain, for example, the Tories, you can't sit on benefits all day and do fuck all, you must work, but the fact of the matter is that, we don't go up to gorillas in the jungle and say, you owe us £50 for standing in this bit of jungle. Please justify your existence. And I just think as long as we're not shitting on people who who decide to live their lives in other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody makes their own choices. And if you want to live on stand on the beach and bury your head in the sand and you get a certain kind of pleasure from it, or it's just, even if you don't and you just choose to live that way, that's absolutely fine, and that's why I would never force anybody into a coaching relationship. And when I work in organizations, sometimes people get sent for coaching. They don't really want to be there, but quite often when you give them the opportunity to do whatever they want, there is, in my experience, there's always a certain innate drive for doing something. People are not happy when they just bury their head in the sand and choose to do nothing, and most people that still choose to do that are just afraid of the alternative, which means to go out and have perhaps even more anxiety or more uncertainty. Burying your head in the sand, you know what you're getting yourself into, you know what this is. This is a very certain environment, and that's why people get stuck in jobs they hate, because at least they know the job that they hate. And the next one that they might go into after the quit this one, there's anxiety, there's uncertainty, and it might be even worse. Who knows? So they'd rather stick with something that they know and bear the anxiety that comes with it.
Absolutely. And I think it's that notion of uncertainty. And in fact, I think it was that word that brought my attention to you and you to me, Yannick, I think through LinkedIn or something.
Yes,
is this
true.
idea that we both have an interest in the role of uncertainty in our lives, because there is that sense of, on a daily basis, stuff happens and you're never quite sure how to respond to it. There is some element of psychology, the kind of things we talk about, that can help us with those experiences and may help us with the sense of anxiety. It may not mean it goes away. It may mean just kind of managing it in certain ways. And in the end, it does come down to, we are faced with choices all the time. I think the analogy of the surfing, being on the beach in general, is a great one, because whilst there's a sense of, absolutely, there's water there, you can choose to go out into the water, explore, ride waves if need be. You can also choose to lie on the beach and soak up the sun and just relax, read a book, do whatever it might be, play some sport there, or, to use the term we've been using, bury your head in the sand. These are all choices. And that's this idea that
we haven't even talked about grabbing a machete and venturing out into the jungle.
Absolutely. So the idea is that you've always got those choices, and that to me is the existential question of which we're all faced with, and many people don't actually spend time reflecting on and addressing, is this idea we wake up each morning and we have choices, and we tend to kind of just go through some accepted way of being because we think that's what we're supposed to do. So Louis and I have often talked about, we go through our working life, or maybe we choose to get married, have children, engage in any activity. These are all choices we face with a sense of either there is some purpose to it, or it'll give us some enjoyment, or maybe there is, it's a so-called good life, I'm doing good for others. These are all just choices, and it's something we're faced all the time. And that's where I think ideas within positive psychology can help. I think also ideas within existentialism can help, because it allows us to reflect on those kinds of questions, which I think many people don't really do on a day-to-day basis.
I agree.
And on that note, maybe we're at time there, Louis. So I think let's say a big thank you to Yannick for joining us on both this episode and our previous one. I'm hoping maybe at some point in the future, Yannick, you may come back and talk to us more about either ways of surfing, ways of snowboarding, either in actual terms or metaphorically.
Absolutely.
And maybe we might even teach Louis to swim.
Just to clarify, I can swim, but I don't like it. Right? I don't like it.
Which is fine. Thanks,
that's
guys.
Great. Thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed myself, and looking forward to perhaps get together again at some point.
Brilliant. Will do. Thank you. Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.